So hello everyone. Just to explain that I'm from South West London Law Centres, and I know a few of you have already crossed my path, which has been a great interaction. So thank you very much for already talking to me. And South West London Law Centres has existed since the 70s in different forms. We were different separate law centres and then came together to kind of form a big mighty law centre. And we help people in Merton, Wandsworth, Sutton, Croydon, Richmond and Kingston. So they're the areas that we cover. And we do employment law, welfare benefits, housing, immigration and debt. And mainly we have legal aid contracts. We also have some project work. So I do community engagement, which is project work not covered by legal aid, and allows me to do lots of this kind of stuff, which is kind of going back to what the roots of law centres were, which hopefully I can show you a little demonstration now. If you just bear with me for one moment. Okay, so I know I shouldn't have stopped sharing screen. Okay, all right, I'm just going to play this little video that's on the BFI website, and it talks about North Kensington Law Centre, which was, I believe, the first one, and should give us a little overview of what they...
Extraordinary. On his way to help the Hughes family, who have been illegally evicted, turned out literally onto the streets. For Peter Candler, it's yet another emergency case. For the Hughes family, breaking their way in with his help, protected by the watchful eye of the police, it's a hopeful start to the struggle to keep their home. Peter Candler is more of a legal battler than a traditional solicitor. He's not afraid of getting his hands dirty for a good cause. For him, bringing the services of the law to those who really need it, like the Hughes family, is what justice is all about.
He turned this unimposing high street shop into a law centre 3 years ago and dispelled the idea for people living in North Kensington that the law is only available to those who can afford it. Peter, the law is a profession where you can make a great deal of money. Why did you decide instead to start this centre?
I was fed up with rich, obnoxious clients. I felt that I wasn't giving a service to the community. I wanted to give that service to people who were deprived in various ways. And so when the idea of the law centre came up, I immediately wanted to do that sort of work.
So what are the sort of people that you're aiming to help?
We're aiming to help those people who cannot afford to pay private solicitors, which and those people form a very large section of the community.
People come here with all kinds of problems they wouldn't think of taking to a private solicitor, like Mrs. McCarthy.
I think they'd probably better see someone. Would you like to come through? Right, thank you
very much. What's the problem?
The landlord has given me notice to quit the premises.
Why has he done that? Yeah.
Well, there's pretty bad conditions due to illegal move, and I made a complaint about it. So it's because of it that he's tried to evict me.
Well, what I can do for you is to write immediately to your landlord and give him 7 days to repair the roof. If he doesn't do that, we should take him to court and get a court order. And as far as the eviction is concerned, you needn't worry about that. We can keep you there for a reasonable length of time.
Beneath the lack of formality and the deliberate shabbiness of it all,
Okay.
is a non-stop world.
All right, I'm going to end it there because that is not as relevant. Unfortunately, I'm sure those things are obviously still the things that we see hugely, and people still live in loads and loads of disrepair. Also, unfortunately, people aren't always getting the legal advice and support that they need, which is rubbish. But decades later, at certain points it might have improved, but the kind of strip back of legal help and organising has meant that it has got worse again. So I mean, like, I hope a lot of this can be about us discussing what can be done, because the title is Accessing Legal Support and Building Stronger Organised Social Housing Tenants' Voices in South London. And obviously I need your expertise. I can talk about the legal aspect of it and what a law centre can do to help tenants. But yeah, whatever we can basically do to support you and your groups. So that's the video that we just showed. I'm just going to really quickly talk about legal aid, which covered a lot of our work. So legal aid was first introduced in 1949. And Wikipedia says it is the provision of assistance to people who are unable to afford legal representation and access to the court system. Legal aid is required as central in providing access to justice by ensuring equality before the law, the right to counsel, and the right to fair trial. I did look at other explanations of it in Wikipedia, but felt this was a really fitting one. So in 2012, the Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act was passed. So it might be that you might know it as LASPO. And I mean, it's big in our world if you're in the legal sector. And I think tenants massively would have felt the impact of it, but maybe aren't aware that legal aid has kind of been stripped back as a result of this act. So unfortunately, in the same era, there were other detrimental changes that really impacted tenants. So not only was legal aid stripped back, so people couldn't access free legal advice in the same way that they used to be able to, but there was also the welfare reform that act was passed, that reform was in 2012, which affected a lot of tenants. And the Localism Act, which basically changed people's right to succession in their properties. So this again affected a lot of tenants, unfortunately. So I'm just going to really quickly talk about tenants organising needs to be one weapon in our arsenal, arsenal that should be, against injustice, and the law needs to be another. And so you might have seen recently on ITV them covering the housing cases, but we're in really bad disrepair. There was one in the borough that I live in Croydon, and people had obviously completely got to the very end. They had probably lived in unsafe conditions for a very long time and no one was helping. The ceilings were collapsing, there was floods in rooms. It was a really, really, really bad danger to people's health and their families' health. But they probably had turned to a lot of different places before they turned to ITV to cover it, which is not acceptable. And people should be able to get responses from their landlord way earlier and help from legal advice. So yeah, sometimes tenants turn everywhere and nowhere will help. Journalists need to be called, social media needs to share injustice, tenant groups, which I'm sure you will be able to testify, tenant groups need to be formed, meetings and demonstrations need to be created, which is what actually happened on that estate in Croydon where ITV News covered it. They've kind of had protests following the revelations in that ITV News report. And law centres should be part of that organising. So obviously we can help with the legal advice, and that's what our legal advice team are able to do. But I think that beyond the legal advice, we should definitely have a role which should be which tenants can lead and kind of tell us to be part of. But we should be able to support tenants with the organising side of things. So Mary, one of the ladies who is a member of the London Tenant Federation for the purposes of this recording, attended the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Select Committee with us a few weeks ago. We were able to give evidence to the Select Committee talking about disrepair in our homes and the fact that the Housing Ombudsman, which is kind of meant to be a platform that tenants can go to take action against their landlord and to get repairs done, it doesn't really do that much to help, unfortunately. And what I took from it, obviously because I'm coming from a legal perspective, is that legal advice really, really, really is needed to kick to kick landlords into action alongside tenants. So this is the kind of stuff I think speaking to those committees, the Law Centre can support with, sharing things on our social media, helping with press releases. They're the kind of things that we could be supporting with. But again, it would be really good to hear what other tenants' ideas are on that. So accessing legal support, I talked about this recently, what my kind of approach is, just to explain, I'm not a solicitor, but what my approach is in all instances, I think tenants should identify evidence, report and connect. So if there is an issue that is impacting you, you should identify the issue, evidence it. So if there's a leak in your ceiling, you should identify, okay, there's a leak, that's why my floor is flooded. Evidence it, take photos, write down what time it started. It's really important that you also say how it's affecting you. So has it impacted your family? Can you sleep in that room? How is it making you feel? And report it. So you need to report it to your landlord as soon as possible and keep reporting it. And then connect. So connect with your other neighbours. And also around reporting, it's really important that after you've reported the issue, you then, I would start the complaint process. So maybe give it a day or two for your landlord to address the issue. But if they haven't done it within a reasonable time, then I would make a stage 1 complaint and then a stage 2 complaint, because that kind of allows you to go to the housing ombudsman, and that it's kind of a good thing to start going. And sometimes if you go to a solicitor, they will say, have you gone through your landlord's internal complaint procedure? And then connecting with your tenant and resident association is really, really important. If there isn't one where you live, forming one or a action group is also really important. So what we can do, the South West London Law Centre can help with on an individual basis. We can help with emergency advice and representation at court for housing possession cases. So housing possession cases are effectively when your landlord's trying to remove you, or your mortgage lender's trying to remove you from the property. So I think possession can be quite a confusing word, but I tend to associate it with eviction. So if there is if you need emergency advice representation at court, then we do have solicitors at courts in South West London that provide free on the day legal advice. And it's really important, if you are attending the court that day, then you should take as much evidence with you as possible. If there is disrepair, take photos. If you've kept a diary of the disrepair, how it's affected you, when you've reported it. And you should kind of like try and take all correspondence between you and the landlord, or if you've spoken to a housing officer, then keep all of that information and then take that with you to court. So when you're getting representation, that can contribute to your case. If there is disrepair in the property, so if you've got things like mould, leaks, and they're quite severe, then you can make a counterclaim, which basically means that it's a kind of a counter argument to your, if you're in rent arrears, then you could argue that the disrepair, basically make a counterclaim for the disrepair. So homelessness, sometimes you might have been made homeless, and you might need some legal advice around that. Sometimes people have approached the council and they've been refused help. That might be if you're a social tenant, that might be that you've been told by the council that you've made yourself intentionally homeless. You might be fleeing domestic violence or domestic abuse, and you want help from the council and they refuse it. So if you feel that you are entitled to homelessness support and the council has refused it, then it's important to get legal advice. Succession for tenants. So I think that is really important. As mentioned, the law around that changed a few years ago in the Localism Act, and local authorities now have their own policies on succession. So it's really important that, sometimes you can just do a Google search to look at your local authority's housing policy and then search for succession, and it will explain what the policy is. So sometimes you might be told that there's no right to succeed, but when you actually look at the policy, you can argue it. So rented home in such poor condition that it's affecting your health, so that's things like disrepair. The threshold's quite high, so it is really important that you have evidence, medical evidence. So if it's affecting your health, then get medical evidence. And then things like getting a rent deposit, I guess that will apply to private tenants. but we have like a session that would be able to help advise people in that situation. So these are the things that a tenant, private or social, could access. And then for an issue that impacts multiple tenants, the South West London Law Centres could help with. So this is the kind of stuff where I see my role coming in. So we could organise estate meetings in South West London and invite a solicitor to speak, or just facilitate tenants coming together to share experiences. Door knock, post a leaflet. If there is a housing issue, obviously it needs to be something that maybe with a law centre, a housing issue that the law centre feels that it can support. And we can share the issue on social media. We can help with press releases to media outlets and support that as well. And teach people how to record issues. So if you do an estate meeting, then you might have lots of different tenants giving kind of testimonies saying there's no hot water in my flat, someone else says there's no hot water in my flat, and you know, quite a lot of tenants will be affected by the same issue, which gets quite overwhelming. But hopefully if we can kind of figure out the ways to actually document different people's stories in the right way, then that can build a really, really, really strong case. So I can help with that as well. So the complaint process, as I mentioned earlier, is really important. So going through the landlord's internal complaint process, so I can help people figure out where that is, what it is, and then how you kind of form a complaint. And sometimes there's compensation attached to that as well. So again, if it's a housing issue that the law centre supports, we could support with protests, marches, rallies, and submitting evidence and speaking with politicians. As I mentioned earlier, we were able to do that recently. From the evidence we gave to the committee, a report is going to be made with recommendations to the government. So we're hoping we can kind of do a bit more campaigning and lobbying at that point. So other places to get legal support, which I thought might be useful for tenants, and especially tenant association leads, because I understand that often tenants might go to the kind of chair or vice chair or secretary within a TRA and say that I need his help, and you're not necessarily able to do it. And so there are places like Advice Local, which I think is really helpful. It's a database where you type in a postcode and it shows you all the local legal advice agencies that might be able to help, and you can search by subject. Then there's Citizens Advice, which hopefully people have heard of. It used to be called Citizens Advice Bureau. Again, it's a national charity and a network of local small citizens advice that you can connect with. Shelter provides emergency advice if you're homeless, have nowhere to stay that night, or are worried about losing your home. So they're the kind of things that I thought would initially start this discussion, but I feel that probably tenants have got a much stronger, more important points to make within this. And if there is anything that you feel South West London could be doing to support with tenant cases, then I'd be really interested and keen to know how we can support with that, and where it's a housing issue that we do support. All right, thank you.